Now listen very carefully. The Capos have had a live green tree for the past 100 years. They will continue to have one. You understand?
Welcome to week 125 of Misha Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
We finished episode 605, which originally aired Monday, December 15th, 1986. Julia finds that Mason has shaved his mustache. She says the time is right to try again. Has it really been a month? But they need to pick a better location this time. Mason suggests a room at the Orient Express. No, at the Capwell Hotel. So there's a little bit of a gag about that not being neutral territory, but I think they ended up agreeing it's better than the two weirdo places they went last time. Julia says it's good if he's seeing someone, as it will help them keep this interaction on an interpersonal... No, on an interpersonal level? What is it? On an informal level? Impersonal level, yes. Impersonal level. She notes that Mason seems to be anxious to get in touch with Victoria, but he reiterates again that there's nothing between him and Victoria. I feel like Julia's got a crush on Mason at this point.
I think there's a little bit of energy between them.
Julia shows Lionel the new dress she has to meet her mystery man tonight. She says it would be easier if she didn't have to schedule their time together. But Lionel will never find out who the man is. After their time together, Mason and Julia cuddle, but both are a bit anxious about how much is too much. When Julia goes off to have her shower, they give each other a little kiss on the lips, and Julia heads off to the shower. Anyway, that's scene one. Eden asks Pearl why Victoria is really leaving town. Pearl says, I employed my natural charm to convince her to move to Hollywood to make big bucks. Keeping him here, moving her there, the battle is won. You two are my ideal, and nobody messes with my ideal. I guess you could say I'm a hopeful romantic. So I think he does a pretty good job of covering for Victoria's real reason, because I think Eden buys that. Pearl then shows up at Cruz's just as Victoria is leaving. She reveals that she did not tell Cruz she's pregnant. Mason asks Julia why she's leaving, and she says she hasn't made any friends in Santa Barbara, which he's a bit thrown by. She says, I just reminded you of someone you once loved. After Victoria leaves town, for some reason, Mason goes to her old apartment, where he finds that she left a necklace behind. He leaves a message on her answering machine in L.A. telling her he'd like to return it in person. So Victoria actually is back in L.A. because we see her in the room listening to the machine record the message from Mason. So she actually did leave town again. Will it last more than a day this time? And will Mason really not interested in Victoria, as he keeps telling Julia?
Well, he's acting pretty interested.
Pearl tries to get Cruz to serve him some eggnog, but Cruz doesn't have any. So Pearl insists that Cruz get in the Christmas spirit and drags him to Buzz's Christmas Tree Emporium, where they run into Eden, who tells him to make sure he puts the angel on his tree last, as it will bring him luck for the next year. Eden shows up at the beach house and drops off a bunch of ornaments for Cruz. For some reason he opens the angel first and goes to the tree to put it on, but then stops, remembering Eden's warning to put it on last, and he sits back down in his chair and looks at his tree that's almost completely bare except for one little strand of lights, and he just stares off into space. So he's, I think, wondering if he's done the right thing, breaking up with Eden, trying to stay away from her, if he should try to get back with Eden. I think there's a lot in that stare. Lionel accuses Carolyn of abandoning Alice because she was too dark. Carolyn says 20 years ago in Georgia, Alice would not have fit in as black or white. Lionel insists she tell Alice that she is her mother and Sue. Carolyn says, you can't really tell me and Gus how to raise our child, but I think Lionel is going to push that. And I think Alice will find out now whether it'll be Alice and Gus who tell her together, or Carolyn and Gus who tell Alice together, or what? I don't know, but I think it's going to happen this week. Now, of course, Carolyn does mention in this conversation, what about Jane? How's she going to feel? So I think we can count on Jane dressing up as Roxanne again after that reveal. And that's it for our Monday episode.
Yeah, pretty quiet episode, actually.
Yeah, but everyone's got their Christmas trees now, so yeah, I don't know what Pearl's going to do. He's not going to be dating Victoria. He's not going to be dating Alice. He's presumably not going to be dating Kelly. He's presumably not going to be dating Courtney. Maybe they need to introduce someone for Pearl. All right, we'll be back after we watch episode 606. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
I guess you might say I'm kind of a hopeful romantic.
Welcome to episode 606 of Misha Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
We've watched episode 606, which originally aired Tuesday, December 16th, 1986. Victoria tells Mason to just put the necklace in the mail, but instead he shows up at her place in L.A. She tells Mason she's moving to Amsterdam for 4 months to shoot a movie. Max, that's Victoria's agent, tells her to get an abortion, but she refuses. Later, Mason calls Max and asks for Victoria's phone number in Amsterdam, and he says, "It's not true. If you're a friend of hers, tell her it's professional suicide." Mason says, "What?" Max says, "Oh, maybe she hasn't told you yet." So, I feel like Mason knows something's up.
Yeah, and it would be really easy for him to get the wrong idea based on the very limited amount of information he's given here, and all he needs is maybe a tiny bit more to think that maybe,
I mean, Pearl knows the truth, I guess.
Yeah.
That's potential, but I don't see a direct line from Mason to Pearl at this point. But,
no.
unless Pearl lets Julia know, and then Julia tells Mason. I don't know. Julia is annoyed when Mason shows up 45 minutes late to their 2 o'clock appointment in the hotel room, because when he left in the morning, he already knew he was going to jet off to L.A. for a couple hours, and that's a couple-hour drive there and back. And anyway, he kind of blows it off, and she's extremely angry with him the whole time she's taking off her clothes. Which was kind of a funny...
They're not really in the mood.
No, they're, they're on a schedule. Brian and Alice go for a walk, and he reiterates that they are different people now than when they were in love in the hospital. Carolyn tells Lionel that he's a bigot for concluding that race was the reason that she treated Alice badly, considering it's clear that she's just as bad of a mother to Jane. She tells Lionel he's interfering in something that's none of her concern. It's up to her and Gus to tell Alice. Carolyn tells Jane about Gus, and Jane is extremely happy about it and hugs her mom. Goes, "Oh, that explains where you were off to, why you went to see someone in a prison, why you had a private detective." So I don't think she'll remain as happy when she finds out that Carolyn is Alice's mother, but at least they might have a couple of happy days before the beans get spilled by someone. Mm-hmm. Carolyn and Lionel make up too, so I guess Lionel knows everything, right? So yeah, I think there's not going to be anything new in between, unless there's another secret that I don't know about, but I think we know everything. Mm-hmm. Courtney tries to get Pearl to talk Brian out of writing his book about Madeline's murder, Pearl finds Brian living in the bungalow where Madeline was killed. And Brian tells Pearl that he thinks Courtney killed Madeline. Pearl is not in any way on board with this theory. Brian asks Pearl to get Courtney to come to the bungalow because he wants to reenact the murder. And it's quite funny how matter-of-factly Brian is just stating all of these things. Well, meanwhile, he's typing away at his book while Pearl's freaking out about everything. Pearl tells Courtney that Brian thinks she's the killer, and she starts to freak out in the Orient Express, and more so than you would think if she wasn't the killer. So I think Pearl's walked in thinking, here's this absurd thing Brian thinks, and now maybe by the end of this conversation, he's like, oh, what really is happening here? Mm-hmm. So I don't know if Pearl will think that's because she has something to do with Madeline's murder, or she's just freaked out by the whole thing, as she was, earlier put off by the fact that Brian was writing the book, and she kind of told Pearl, it's dredging up all these things for the family, and everyone's going to be traumatized by it. So, but I think looks like they're moving things forward quite quickly here. I have a feeling maybe this reenactment thing is going to happen anyway. Because maybe Pearl will take Courtney over to Brian's to, give Courtney a chance to get angry with him, but he may have everything all set up already. We'll see. Some of their reenactments on Santa Barbara are great, and some of them peter out. So it'll be interesting to see what Brian has concocted.
It would be interesting if maybe Courtney comes into it thinking it's just her and Brian, and maybe she tries to attack him or something, and then Pearl and maybe others will actually see the whole thing.
I feel like it could be happening in the next episode. That's it for this episode. I don't think, did we see someone from Santa Barbara recently in a thing? I can't recall. I was watching an All in the Family today and find out that Mike and Gloria had actually moved to Santa Barbara and not LA, as I had thought. So that was a nice little Santa Barbara reference, which Archie Bunker referred to as a suburb of Hollywood. All right, we'll be back after we watch episode 607 of Santa Barbara. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
So, those are your children, are they?
When they were much younger.
Oh, I met your son Mason. Somehow he doesn't seem to resemble the others.
Well, actually, you're right. Mason's mother was my first wife, Pamela.
Welcome to episode 607 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
Episode 607 aired on Wednesday, December 17th, 1986. And I just remembered who it was that we had seen recently. Missy Brennan, Jade Perkins from Santa Barbara, has been appearing on Days of Our Lives this last few days for John Black's funeral. So that is one Santa Barbara alumnus that we have seen. Alumna?
And we've actually seen some flashbacks, a lot of flashbacks actually with this week of episodes, and they do include some where I think she's probably just a year or two out from her role in Santa Barbara.
It was an early Jack and Jennifer scene, and she didn't look too much different than Jade Perkins at that point. Lionel's dinosaur dig has part of the atrium of the Capwell house exposed, and there's dirt everywhere, which Gina trips over at one point while complaining about the Christmas tree. Cece teases Gina about her libido being her downfall, because she's apparently been lusting after handymen as they go in and out of the house. Mason tells Cece that he's been researching their house guest, Jeffrey Conrad. So he's living on the Capwell property, and I didn't really re-examine the scenes that he's in, but is he living in the guest house? And if so, where's Sophia living then?
Yeah, I have no idea. This was a surprise to me as well. I actually thought he was in hospital. So.
Yeah, well, it's a big space he's in, so I think it's the guest house, because I don't think there's any bedrooms upstairs that are that big, and it has an entry. If it were upstairs, that would make it in the hallway on the same side as Channing's room, which we'd never really see except for Channing's room. So, I think he's in the guest house. I don't know where Sophia's sleeping. Mason indicates he's found nothing noteworthy so far. He's looked at Jeffrey's medical records and police records, and there's nothing. And Mason also shows Cece a red folder with information about the men who are going to fake Kelly's kidnapping. Gina overhears the tail end of this conversation as Cece says, "You are picking the men who are going to put an end to Gina." So Gina has a horrified look on her face. I think at first she thinks they're going to kill her, but she comes up with a different idea later in the episode.
I think you and I actually mentioned during this episode, or maybe one of the many that came before it, how easily people just are talking to each other in the hallways or, you know, in empty rooms in the Capwell mansion.
They should at least meet in the tunnel or something. Or in the attic where Kirk Cranston kept his typewriter. When Mason is on the phone, Gina flips through the red folder. So Mason is, of course, as you might guess, on the phone, trying to track down Victoria Lane. Jeffrey, living at the guest house, as we think, calls the mystery woman, and this time we do not see her. We just hear Jeffrey talking to her. So that memory I had of the mystery woman must have been from the last episode. Tells her he's still at the Capwells and that he's found an old photo album, which he then later proceeds to flip through. Sophia arrives to check on Jeffrey, and he asks a bit about who's who in the Capwell house, and Sophia, indicates Cece wants him to feel at home and have a tour of the place. So Cece loves randomly inviting people into his life that he thinks are great for very minimal reasons, and then also inviting, also trying to shut out people like Cruz because he's not white. So it's very interesting.
It's funny, too, because I keep thinking back to the very, very earliest days of the show when we still had Joe Perkins, and there was so much made about the security in the manor and how difficult it was going to be for Joe to get to Channing's room, and there's just been no sign of that, really, for the last few years.
I mean, Jeffrey, all we know about him, he's got an English accent and he saved Sophia. The research indicates very little, but he mentions to Sophia, Jeffrey does, that he lives in a 4th floor walk-up and this place is like a palace. So he's not rich, and Mason must, know that already. So Sophia and Jeffrey talk a bit about the family and the album he's flipping through, and then after she leaves, Gina barges in just as Jeffrey has taken off his shirt to take a shower, and as Jeffrey flirts with her, Gina comes to the conclusion that dossier is a list of men that Mason has hired to seduce her, and that Jeffrey is the first one. While Jeffrey's in the shower, Gina fantasizes about Cece arriving in a tuxedo while she's in the bathtub. Gina says, "I'll be out in a minute." Cece says, "I'll be in a minute." Mason later finds Jeffrey looking at photos in the atrium on that little credenza that's next to the stairs. Jeffrey says, "You must be Mason Capwell." And they discuss Gina's odd behavior to Jeffrey. Later, Jeffrey's looking at the photo of Kelly as Cece arrives, and he says, "So, Mason doesn't look like these other members of the family." And Cece says, "Well, he is the result of my first marriage." Cece offers him a big check for saving Sophia's life, but Jeffrey refuses it, instead saying, I'm looking for a job. Cece says, "Oh, I've got all manner of businesses. I'm sure we can slot you in somewhere." So I don't know if this is a plan to infiltrate themselves into the Capwell lives that he and the mystery woman have initiated, because obviously he's not letting on that he already knows all about the Capwells.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time.
Nope. Let me just see if I skipped over anything. Nope. Suddenly, Cece says, "Have I seen you somewhere before?" To which Jeffrey replies, "I don't think so." Now, I was wondering in my head all manner of potential things where Jeffrey might have previously been stalking the Capwell family, but it does occur to me that maybe Cece just spotted him on the phone that day at the Orient Express when we first saw him. So that's possible. That's what that's a reference to, but could be anything. So be interesting to see if that goes somewhere else. While it's being while Jeffrey's away, Mason snoops around the guest house to see if he can find any evidence among Jeffrey's things. Gina enters with a tray for Jeffrey, and Mason says, "Oh, you're on a first name basis with our guest so soon." Gina says, "He's kind of cute, but no man is worth $1 million. Then she tells Mason that she's seen the file, and she knows that they are men who've been hired to seduce her. So I guess Mason got away with that one. She says the only man she's ever been crazy enough over to give up $1 million is Mason himself. So this is an interesting, solidification of something we've thought, that Gina may actually have had feelings for Mason while she was married to Cece. This is something that will recur in the future. Then she has another fantasy about making love with Mason this time. And as Jeffrey arrives, Gina has, for some reason, taken off her shirt during her fantasy. So that's how the episode ended for Gina and Jeffrey. Julia calls Lionel to say that Gus's hearing has started. This leads to a conversation between Carolyn and Lionel. She tells Lionel that she is sorry she didn't try to make her life work with Gus. They kiss, so they have made up. And then Julia calls back saying Gus's parole has been granted. So I fully hope and expect Gus to walk in the door in the next episode, and this may accelerate some revelations. Pearl says that he told Brian he was wrong about her killing Madeline, but that does not stop Courtney from getting more and more agitated during this conversation at the Orient Express. Then, when he tells Courtney that Brian has moved into Madeline's bungalow, she really starts to freak out and accuses Pearl of believing Brian over her. Brian arrives, and Courtney tells him to stay away from her. Brian realizes that Pearl is starting to suspect Courtney too after this overreaction. Brian asks Pearl if he wants him to drop his plan. Pearl says he doesn't want to hurt Courtney anymore. But Brian asks, what if Courtney kills someone else? So Brian shows Pearl the actress that he's hired for his plan at the bungalow. And Pearl reluctantly asks Courtney to come to the bungalow. Courtney arrives at the bungalow, and Pearl mentions some of the inconsistencies in the stories that Courtney has told about her and Madeline since they've met. Whenever you talk about Madeline, you become a totally different person. It's kind of scary. And Courtney says, "Are you saying I'm crazy?" Pearl turns off the lights, and the two actresses appear, playing Madeline and Courtney, saying dialogue that Brian has written for them as they argue about David Laurent and Keith Timmons. Courtney calls for them to stop and says, "That's not how it happened." They let the actresses go home, and Courtney says that she did kill Madeline. And then she pulls a gun out of her purse. Something neither Pearl nor Brian expected. We maybe did expect it because they showed us that she had a gun earlier when she left to go to the bungalow. She dropped her purse and the gun slid out on the Campwell atrium and she put it back. So it was just as effective the way I did it, by hiding that fact until the end, I think, since that was the cliffhanger.
Now, I had expected when this storyline first came out and we were starting to suspect Courtney that with all the lawyers on the show, it would come out in the courtroom. But no, it looks like it's come out in this way instead.
Yeah, and as I've said before, I wonder if all this rejigging of this pause in the murder storyline for months and months is all due to Robin Wright leaving and them thinking, oh, we'll keep this girl around because we never know when we might need to slot her into something that we had Kelly planned for originally. So I guess they think they might not need her anymore. What does that mean? And we have a character returning tomorrow, so that'll be exciting. I won't make you guess who it is. That is it for the Wednesday episode. I'm excited about Thursday. We'll see how Courtney's freak out affects Brian and Pearl. Will she kill them both and stay at the Capwell mansion pretending she knows nothing about it? Or will this be her downfall? We'll see when we watch episode 608 of NBC's Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye-bye.
What did you think, that nature would just take its course and you'd reward him somehow later?
Yeah. Something like that.
Mason, he's kind of cute, but no man is worth $1 million. Not even a hunk like that. You were the only man I was ever crazy enough about to give up a fortune for. But then I didn't even do that. I don't know what I ever saw in a snake like you.
I've got a great rattle.
I can't get my fill of you.
Well, if you can't control yourself, I'll be out in a minute.
No. I'll be in a minute.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to episode 608 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara. And we did indeed watch Santa Barbara episode 608, which originally aired Thursday, December 18th, 1986. And featured the final appearance of Madeline Capwell. So after a long, long number of months in which she appeared in only about 18 episodes, Madeline Capwell has left the canvas. In Madeline's bungalow, Courtney pulls a gun out of her purse and reveals that she killed Madeline. But it wasn't murder. The gun, in fact, is Madeline's, and Madeline had lured Courtney to the bungalow to kill her. And in a struggle, the gun went off and killed Madeline. And the struggle did not seem to really portray how exactly that happened, because it seemed like Courtney reached for her arm, and then we heard a gunshot while both of them seemed to be reaching into the air, and then Madeline was dead. So I don't quite know the blocking of how that went, or how it was supposed to go, or how it was meant to look. But long story short, Madeline was on the ground. She was not dead, though. Courtney hid when she heard David Laurent come in. And then David Laurent rushed off, and Courtney assumed it was to get help, but she found out later that he just took off. And so that's why she was so dead set on framing him for it, because she actually did go and call an ambulance or something, she said. But or maybe she assumed David had. I forget exactly how that part went.
Now, do we, I may have missed it, but do we know exactly what Madeline's motive was for luring Courtney there?
Well, Madeline said, I do not consider our inheritance something to be shared. Everyone know that I killed you out of self-defense. Because I found your diary, I really must confess my gratitude to you. So it looks like she just wanted her half of the inheritance, the future inheritance from Grant. Or did Grant die before they came back? Or has Grant died?
I don't
think
really
he's died.
think he's
No,
died.
Madeline's dead. So some future inheritance, I guess. Yeah. So that was it. And she said, I was reading your diary and I realized this would be the perfect thing for them to find.
Now, we assume that wraps up the whole sort of murder mystery, but really we are still only left with Courtney's word that this is what actually happened. So we
saw
really
the
don't ever
flashbacks, but of course she's crazy too. So Pearl immediately says, "Oh, don't worry, we'll cover for you. We won't tell the police." And looking at Brian's face, he's kind of like, "What? When did we decide this?" Pearl realizes that later when Brian goes for a walk, and Pearl wonders if Brian is going to the police. But Brian returns, and later, when Pearl visits Courtney, she says, "Did Brian go to the police?" He says, "No, Brian has agreed to keep your secret." And then we see Brian tearing up his manuscripts, and he says, "Goodbye, Madeline." So that is the end of the Madeline Laurent murder storyline. Mason shows up in L.A. and tells Victoria that he knows she's not going to Amsterdam. "How could you lie to me?" And she says, usually when you tell someone something to get them off your back, they just accept it graciously. They don't keep digging away. Anyway, Mason returns to Santa Barbara to have sex with Julia, and but hires a clown to entertain Victoria while he's gone. Clown shows up at her door unexpectedly. Julia reveals to Lionel that Mason is her prospective father, and Lionel is expectedly incredulous at the idea that she's picked Mason with all his flaws. And the worst thing is, he says to Julia, he learned everything from C.C. Capwell. Lionel is also a little worried about losing Alice to Gus. Gus arrives in Santa Barbara, and he wonders why Carolyn hasn't told Alice yet. But then he thinks he likes the idea of telling her together. But Carolyn says, "No, I want to do it on my own." So Gus is immediately, and I had kind of remembered this, that the animosity starts to build between Gus and Carolyn almost immediately upon his return. Alice decides to get Brian a Christmas tree and unexpectedly runs into Gus at the Christmas tree lot. And they have a very happy reunion, not the way Carolyn had planned. He immediately starts asking her what she remembers about, the shooting. And she says, "I remember a policeman shot you." And Lionel and Carolyn show up because Carolyn realizes that that's probably where Alice went due to her earlier talking about getting a tree for Brian, and was trying to head off this meeting, but sadly for her, she's too late. And Alice happily introduces Lionel and Carolyn to her father, and they kind of play along as if they didn't already know him. Back at the Lockridge mansion, Gus tells Carolyn that she always liked fancy places like this, and starts to quiz her a little bit about how long she's been there and what's up with her and Lionel. And they end up arguing about whether or not they could have had a life together with Alice. And this is where the tension between Gus and Carolyn really ramps up. Gus says, "I should have known better than to be suckered by you. Now I'm here, but you don't even want to know me. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here because I care about our daughter. I shot a man and I'd do it again. Don't try to come between us. I know certain things about you, and I don't think you want Lockridge to know. Thought you got away with it. Tell Alice I'll be back." So that's interesting. I still have in the back of my head, could Jane somehow be Cece's daughter? I wonder if it could be that.
Well, we'll find out. They're definitely laying out the groundwork for more reveals.
Julia arrives at the Orient Express to meet Mason, who is on the phone with Victoria, checking on the clown, and she assumes the dozen roses that's laying on the table was brought there by Mason for her. And Mason quickly hides the card because apparently he bought them for Victoria. So he's planning to head back to LA after having sex with Julia, and Mason is a bit surprised by the fact that Julia is very appreciative of this romantic gesture. Obviously, very contradictory to all of we got to make sure this stays, totally a business proposition that she's been feeding him this whole time. And we've been seeing, I think, that Julia's kind of thinking her and Mason could be a thing. But Mason's been really doing the opposite this whole time, trying to keep her at bay and pursuing Victoria. Later in bed, Julia mentions how he keeps alternating between being a jerk and a nice guy. Then he mentions that he went to Los Angeles to see Victoria. And he says she's very compassionate. Julia says, "Are you sure you're describing Victoria and not Mary?" Later, Mason calls Victoria. The clown is still there. Now, if you think of the fact that Mason drove to LA, drove from LA to California, met Julia in the Orient Express, had sex with Julia, now is calling, that clown was there for hours. One clown and one Victoria. And Victoria says, "I'm learning to juggle. I'm having an amazing time." She says, "I'm learning to juggle." And Mason says, aren't we all? Because he's now realized that he's suddenly unexpectedly dating two women. Even though he thought he was trying to only date one woman and have sex with another woman. Victoria says, "I was hoping you'd be here by now." And Mason says, "Tomorrow. I have some things to work out." So he were in his own head. I wonder if he too might think that he's in love with Julia and have been suppressing that this whole time because of what she's been saying. And now he's unexpectedly falling for two women that he's also unexpectedly dating. So we cut to Julia. She's still in bed in the hotel room, staring at the roses. So I think Julia's smitten.
You know, for lawyers, they don't really work very long hours.
No, because when he said, "Oh, I just came from L.A., she goes, "Oh, you got suckered into a case where you had to go to L.A., and then that's when he said, "No, I went to visit Victoria." So she thought he was working. But yeah, he's the DA, right? So he's been doing a lot of no DA work every time we see him.
Maybe that's why the police will never solve Madeline's case on their own.
And between trying to, busy planning a fake kidnapping and trying to figure out how to get Gina out of their lives and investigating Jeffrey, who's also just a Capwell House guest, and Julia and Victoria, plus hanging out at the nunnery every once in a while, we really haven't seen him do any work. And, I think the next thing we'll see him do is maybe when that tape arrives. He'll go, "I'm dropping the charges against my sister," because finally we have the tape. So, but sadly Danny's gone, so I don't know if we'll see Angel again no, actually I think the next time we see him is a long time from now. So I think this whole Angel Danny thing is dropped too. So I guess his only thing he's done is try to get Cruz to come back to the force. And that is it for our Thursday episode. Next episode is tomorrow, Friday, December 19th, 1986. Will be episode 609. And we'll see what Pearl and Courtney and Brian are up to, I think. We will see you then.
Bye-bye.
I'm learning how to juggle.
Aren't we all?
You'll use any excuse to see Cruz, won't you? He doesn't want you now, Eden. When are you going to learn that?
Welcome to Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
We finished episode 609 of Santa Barbara, originally aired Friday, December 19th, 1986. And yesterday we had the final appearance of a character, but it wasn't mentioned today, so let's just see how long they go without mentioning it. Just like Nick vanished from the show and it didn't really tell us for a while. Gina is wrapping Christmas presents. She wraps an Action Man figure for Brandon, and then she has a fantasy about the Action Man seducing her, and the Action Man is played by Kevin Sorbo, who would later become known as Hercules. Ted sells his truck to buy earrings for Haley for Christmas. When Haley spots Ted with the buyer, Ted lies and says, this guy can get me some cheap tires for my Jeep because they're so expensive. Ted is surprised to see Haley, and they discuss the fact that Ted has a day off from the radio station and Haley was let go home early. So they're both still working at KUSB, and presumably Jane is too, I guess. So I had kind of wondered, when does Ted's job at KUSB sort of end or peter out. So we will see if they mention KUSB again at some point. Haley ends up, not surprisingly, if you were paying attention to the episode, buying some tires for Ted for Christmas for his truck. They are very expensive, but Gina gives her the money. Now, while this is happening, some men show up carrying a mattress. And that is Gina's present to Ted and Haley. She is converting their 2 twin beds into a nice big bed that she thinks a married couple should be sharing.
And the gift exchange between Ted and Haley is a throwback to a classic O. Henry story, in which a wife sells her hair to buy which I guess they did in the turn of the century, to buy a chain for her husband's watch. And of course, her husband sells his watch to buy a comb for his wife's lovely hair.
Yep. So this may be their Christmas story homage for this season. Just like we had the Christmas Carol a year or two ago with Mason being visited by 3 ghosts. We'll see how big of a thing they make out of this story. Will that bring Ted and Haley closer, or will the mattress Gina bought bring them closer? Eden tells Brandon, hey, would you like to go visit Cruz? But Gina realizes it's just Eden's plan to see Cruz. So she says, he doesn't want you now, Eden. When are you going to learn that? Eden buys another tree from Buzz. This time for the Orient Express. And just a side note, this is the last appearance of Buzz in the show. I guess between the burning down of his place and the Christmas tree lot storyline being at its end, Buzz will no longer be needed.
No, well, he doesn't even own Buzzes anymore.
No. And then we still have to wonder, will they rename it Amy's? It seems like the logical choice. Inside, they seem to have progressed quite a bit. Some fresh beams are up, some wiring is being put in, although Brick almost electrocutes himself. And Cruz is helping, which is handy because he's on leave from the police department. Eden and Santana also join in to help Brick. And then Ted and Haley arrive to help. And they are both really, well, Haley's really hoping Brick won't just kick her out, and Ted thinks, oh, he's a nice guy. He'll be fine with it. There is a bit of a tense moment, but Brick seems to readily accept their offer of help. And it is here that Ted says they both quit their jobs at KUSB to work full-time on repairing buzzes. At least that's how I interpret that line. So this may be, yesterday they wrapped up the Madeline storyline. Today they wrapped up KUSB, potentially.
So does this mean, and maybe you remember, that they will at some point be seen as both being employees at Buzzes?
I mean, that's kind of a bit of a come down for a Capwell, but maybe. I mean, it is handy when you're working at the place that you go to school, commuting-wise.
And we do know that Ted has some restaurant experience from our first season.
From when he and Danny wore pirate hats at that pizza place where he delivered the pizza to Janine Turner. Then, during their fun day of building and repairing and carrying in wood, everyone kind of notices that Cruz and Eden are keeping their distance from each other and kind of whisper to each other, and suddenly they all have to go out to get more wood, and before they know it, Cruz and Eden are alone in Buzz's place. They do kind of, just trying to keep the distance between them, but at one point Eden falls off a ladder and Cruz rushes to her side. So we will see if that changes anything between them as we lead into Christmas. Gina is annoyed watching Cece and Sophia kissing in her atrium. And Cece's new man, Lars, comes in, played by Kevin Sorbo. Lars mentions that he saw Gina yesterday. She doesn't quite remember meeting him, but she must have spotted him in the background, and that's where she got the inspiration for her Action Man fantasy earlier. Lars mentioning getting hired yesterday. Gina says, "See you around, and not just in my daydreams, I hope." Gina also simultaneously suspects the family is hatching a scheme against her, which of course they all are, because they're not doing it very surreptitiously. Gina tells Sophia she's having an open house next week, and Sophia's not invited. Sophia says, "I'm not really living my life hoping to get invitations from you."
In fact, we don't really know where Sophia's living her life, do we?
Well, no, if Jeffrey's living in the guest house, unless Jeffrey's living in a third location. So I don't have the sets memorized, or don't really pay attention to that very much. So, but Jeffrey was living in a huge place, unless he's living in Sophia's old place from before she was living in the guest house. That could be, because that was a huge place. Now, this is annoying to me because, they're trying to keep things a secret from Gina. And Sophia says, "Oh, you should make sure you have one big last bash. Something that all your guests will remember you by." And she's kind of implying that Gina's on her way out. I'm like, you're really, undercutting this potential of this plan to be a surprise, because the big thing is that Gina shouldn't suspect it's a trick.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is going to fail like some of the other previous Capwell plans.
I suspect if it doesn't fail outright, it will not go quite as planned.
Yeah. And the other thing is, how are they going to depict it to us? Cece on the phone, "Oh, yeah, is it working? Like, and how is Gina going to witness it? I think they talked about a reliable witness reporting to Gina, but it seems, I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully there'll be some surprises in it, and it will actually make sense to us as a viewer. As Sophia walks past Lars, she says, "We're going to begin." And then Lars says, "Leave it to me." So I had thought, looking ahead at the credits for this week, for episode 609, there are 3 people credited: Klaus Weber as Buzz number 2, Kevin Sorbo as Lars, and John Otrin as Jeep Man, and they're only credited for this one episode. I thought, oh, those must be the guys helping with the scheme. But in fact, Jeep Man is the guy who bought the Jeep from Ted, and Lars is only in this one episode. Mm-hmm. So whatever they have planned, it's going to involve some other actors, unless it all happens off screen, of course. And so we will find out the sole involvement of Lars in the plans in a second. Apparently it's nothing to do with Cece's plan. This is a Sophia plan. At the Orient Express, Sophia opens his gift from Sophia, and it's a card that says, "One night together at the Capwell guest house." So that can't be where Jeffrey's living. And Cece said, "What about Gina?" And then we cut back to Lars, and he's taking a suitcase out. And when Gina asks about it, "Why are you taking Mr. Capwell's suitcase?" He goes, "Oh, he's got the jet booked." And then she slowly gets some details out of him, like, "Oh, yes, he's flying to Antigua tonight." And then Gina gets the hotel name out of him, and she phones the hotel, and the hotel says, "Oh, yes, Mr. and Mrs. Capwell have the honeymoon suite booked." So Sophia, meanwhile, is relating this tale to Cece, and they're laughing about the fact that Gina's about to get on a flight to Antigua, expecting to catch Cece and Sophia in the act, but basically leaving them at least a night, possibly a whole other day, on their own. So that's kind of funny that there's this totally unexpected new plan happening that we just are introduced to in this one episode. So yeah, that is the only appearance of Kevin Sorbo and the character of Lars. So they made it sound like a bigger role just from the dialogue, but really he's only on this one day. So the magic of television. And that is the end of the episode. We had some cast credits for the first time since episode 601. And Sophia's name is once again spelled correctly without a slash between Capwell and Armonti. And the only difference is our new cast member, Ross Kettle, is playing Jeffrey Conrad. So that may be the casual viewer's first clue that this character is not just a one-off like Lars. And the copy of the show that we watched got cut off right after Robin Wright's credit as Kelly, just before the guest cast members usually appear. But from the fact that Buzz, Lars, and Jeep Man are listed on IMDb, I think it's very likely those were the three. Jeep Man is John Otrin, Lars is Kevin Sorbo, and as I said earlier, Buzz number 2 is Klaus Weber. So we've only got 3 little notations in my spreadsheet for the rest of the year, which is coming soon, as next week we start the week of Christmas. It will be Monday, December 22nd, and it will be week 126 when we watch episode 610. As we say goodbye to week 125 of Santa Barbara. Oh, look at this fancy special effect. It's just the spines of my friend's box sets. I was looking around for number 125, and it was all out of yellow balloons. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
What do you want, Pearl? Oh, boy, a Merry Christmas to you, too, young Ebenezer Castillo.